Welcome to my course on AWS Networking Essentials. This is a part 2 of this series. In the last video, we saw a high-level overview of what is a VPC and what are all the components involved. In this video, we will create a VPC in AWS console, understand what is a CIDR and how to calculate IP ranges, create a subnet within our VPC, attach an internet gateway to our VPC, we will create a route table for our subnet, and finally, we will make the subnet public by editing the route table. So let's get started. I have logged into my AWS account. In case you don't have an AWS account, AWS offers most of their services free for the first 365 days. So you can just go into the AWS website and create a new account for yourself. Now, we are going to create our first VPC. I go to the search bar and type VPC and then select VPC. Once we have this VPC dashboard, we can select your VPCs and this will display all the VPCs that we have so far. And every account will have a default VPC created by AWS. But for the purpose of this demo, I am not going to use this default VPC, so I'll go ahead and delete it. Once we delete this VPC, we can start creating our own VPC from scratch. On the top right, there is a create VPC button. So before we click on that, we will just select which region under which we are going to create our first VPC. So if you select this, there is a list of regions available in AWS. And what is a region? Region is where Amazon has their physical data centers. So if you create a VPC or any resource in AWS, the physical resource will lie in any of these regions which you choose from. So the purpose of this demo, I'm going to just select US East 1, which is the default that is showing for me, right? Based on your business process, business strategies, you will choose one region which will choose the best for you. So let's go ahead and create our first VPC. Click on create VPC and just select VPC only, because for this demo, we are going to create all the other components within the VPC ourselves. I'll just give a name to my VPC. I will say my-VPC. And the next thing that we need to select is the CIDR, which is the range of IP address for this particular VPC. So if you don't understand what a CIDR is, I have already made a 1-minute video on what is a CIDR, which is a part of the same playlist. So I would encourage you to go and watch that first if you are not aware of what is a CIDR. So in a nutshell, I will just say, when I say /24, I will keep the first 24 bits as fixed, which means only the last 8 bits are modifiable from 0 to 255. So this VPC can only have 256 IP addresses, right? Let's keep that in mind so that we can use that when we create subnets. Okay. So let's keep all the other settings as default. I will create my first VPC. So it just took 5 seconds and then my VPC is ready. If you see, the IP address range that we have given is 10.0.0.0/24, right? So with that in mind, let's go ahead and create our first subnet. On the left hand side, click on subnets and on top right, click on the create subnet button. The first thing we need to select is under which VPC my subnet should be created. So we have just created a VPC named my VPC. I will select that and immediately it shows me the CIDR for my VPC. So why is that important? Because you can create multiple subnets inside your VPC and each subnet can get only a share of the VPC's IP address range, right? So with that information, let's go ahead and create the details for our first subnet. So I will say my subnet -public. So I'm naming it public because I just want to create a distinction between my public subnet and a private subnet, so that I'm just giving it a name as public, but we need to make some more configurations to make it a public subnet. Next, we need to select an availability zone. If you remember, we created our VPC under US East region. Under this region, AWS has multiple data centers. We need to select under which data center or under which availability zone we need our subnet to be created. For the purpose of this demo, I don't have any preference, so I'm just selecting no preference which means AWS will automatically choose an availability zone for me. Next, we need to choose a CIDR for our subnet. We know that our VPC has only 256 IP addresses, right? Because the CIDR is /24. So we can only give a share of it to our subnet, right? So let me say 10.0.0.0/28, which means I am locking the first 28 bits and the last 4 bits are modifiable. So if I say last 4 bits, 2 to the power of 4, we have only 16 IP addresses available for this subnet. Okay. So let's go ahead and create our first subnet. So this could take a while and then our subnet will be ready, right? I'm going to click on this subnet and we will see the details. We can see that our subnet has the range 10.0.0.0/28, which means we should have 16 IP addresses. But if you see the available IP addresses, it says 11. This is because AWS uses 5 IP addresses for some special purpose. We will see those details later. And I want to introduce you to some important setting which says auto assign public IPv4 address. What this says is any resource that is created within this subnet should that have an IP address that is a public IP address assigned automatically. For example, if I create an EC2 instance inside the subnet, should that EC2 instance have a public IP address by default, right? If you know that you are going to create a public subnet and all the resources inside the subnet should definitely have a public IP address, then it is good to have this setting enabled. But for the purpose of this demo, I want to show you everything step by step. So I will leave this as no so that we can go ahead and create an elastic IP address later and assign it to our EC2 instance, right? So with this information, we will go ahead and create our first internet gateway. Before we create an internet gateway, let's first understand why do we need it. Inside our AWS cloud, we have created our first VPC and we have also created our first subnet. So till now, we just have a box which is isolated from the internet. So tomorrow, even if you deploy an EC2 instance and then deploy a web server inside it, your web server cannot communicate to the public internet, which means no one from outside can access your web server and resources within your subnet cannot communicate to the internet. For that reason, we need an internet gateway attached to the VPC. With that information, let's go ahead and create our first internet gateway. On the left-hand side menu, just click on Internet Gateways and on top right, create Internet Gateway. Give a name to your internet gateway. I will just say my IGW and I will click on Create Internet Gateway. Now we have our first internet gateway created. So as we saw in the explanation, we need to attach this internet gateway to our VPC, right? On the top, once you create an internet gateway, you will get a notification stating that you need to attach it to a VPC. Even if you accidentally close that, there is an actions button under which you can see attach to VPC. Just click on that and select the VPC to which it has to be attached. So I am selecting my VPC and attach internet gateway. We now have our internet gateway created and attached to our VPC. So with this, we can now go ahead and make our subnet a public subnet. To make our subnet public, we need to edit the route table that is associated with our subnet. So let's first go to our subnet and see if we already have a route table. So this is my subnet, and if I go into the details, I can see that my subnet already has a route table. But this route table is the main route table for our entire VPC. So when you create a subnet, the main route table of your VPC will be automatically attached to your subnet. But I want only one subnet to be public and I want to create another private subnet within the same VPC. So to achieve that, I don't want to edit the route table of my main VPC. I want to create a route table for the subnet exclusively, right? So let's go into the route tables and let's create a route table which can be attached to our subnet. I will give a name to my route table. I will say my public route because I'm going to attach it to my public subnet. I will select the VPC under which this route table will be created. Then I will create a route table. Once your route table is created, you can see that there is a default route which is already created. This default route allows any resource that is created under this VPC to communicate with one another, right? So even if you have multiple subnets within your VPC, any resource that you create within these subnets can communicate with one another privately without going to the public internet. And this default route cannot be deleted, right? So to make our subnet a public subnet, we need to first edit this route and create a public route for this. So I will say add route, and I will say the destination is 0.0.0.0/0, which means all IP addresses. So this is the IP address that you need to choose for public internet. And when any resource is trying to access the internet, the target should be an internet gateway. So I will say the target is internet gateway, and I will choose the internet gateway which I created, right? Now let's save these changes. Your route table is now ready. It has a local route, which is all the resources can communicate with one another within the same VPC. And it also has a public route, which means your resources can now communicate to public internet, right? Now we have created this route table, and then we need to attach it to our subnet. Click on Subnet Associations, and then on the right, you will see Edit Subnet Associations. This will list all the subnets you have within the VPC. I'm going to select my public subnet and save associations. Now that we have attached this route table to our subnet, and the subnet has now become a public subnet because it has a public route. So let's go to our subnet and see if this route table is attached. I go into my subnet and select route table, and I see that my public route has been attached and it has a destination to the public internet, right? So this makes it a public subnet. Now we have come to the end of this video. In this video, we created a VPC, a subnet, and we created an internet gateway and attached it to our VPC. We created a route table and added a public route, attached the route table to our subnet to make it a public subnet. In our next video, we will deploy an EC2 instance inside our subnet. We will create an SSH key pair so that we can log into our EC2 instance. We will attach a public IP to our EC2 instance so that we are able to access it from the public internet. Thanks for watching this video. If you like this video, please comment, subscribe, and share this to your friends. Thank you.